welcome everyone to this inaugural event of our C7 network of cities to go alongside the G7 event, which will take place a few days' time here in the UK. As cities, we're very supportive of the G7 stated aims, but looking at them, we realise that many of them can only be delivered in fresh partnership with cities. Cities represent both the greatest joys and the greatest challenges that our societies face today. With a home of innovation, creativity, and culture, we're places where millions of people choose to live, not just to work, but for a sense of community and identity too. But we're also dealing with real challenges, particularly post-COVID, unequal outcomes, a sense that our economies are transitioning to new structures, poverty, climate change. We're determined that we won't be defined by our challenges, but use them instead to spur us on to greater action. And the leadership that we demonstrate as cities should show our national governments how we can lead and create a better future for everyone. And we know that cities that don't look to the future, that aren't bold and ambitious, will wither and die. So it's a great honour to welcome so many distinguished guests from so many cities, nations and urban networks to this first ever C7, G7 Urban Summit. Because one of the things that binds us together is that as leaders of cities, we want to shape change rather than just allow change to happen to us. This is an historic moment, partly because we've not met in this way before, but also because of the uniquely challenging times that we face, the pandemic, the climate emergency, and the need to create social and economic justice for all. I think we have much to learn from each other, and together a great deal that we can offer to our respective national and federal governments. Part of our aim in holding this event was to make this simple point, that cities must be at the heart of national plans, both for economic recovery and renewal, but also to deliver a more inclusive, greener future that protects people and planet. And we as cities understand the importance of our surrounding towns and regions and other places. We understand that they're mutually dependent. And we recognise that there are no strong regions without well-functioning cities at their heart. Our cities have all been on the front line of combating the pandemic, often being the worst affected. Yet we know that they're also the places most capable of delivering recovery, where we're able to join up the public services to support this and make connections across health, skills, investment, and economic development. We know that cities are growing globally as population hubs, and although they need to adapt, they will continue to drive regional and national economies as natural hubs and incubators of innovation and creativity. Cities can also generate the majority of carbon emissions. But rather than seeing cities as part of the problem, we need to see action in cities as the solution to the climate crisis, because cities are exactly best placed to combat this and enable our nations to achieve, and we hope exceed, their targets. The cities represented here in this emerging network often set far more challenging targets than our respective nations do. And I think we should expect our governments to follow our example. So with my colleagues across the UK core cities and UK key cities, we're working to understand the long-term impacts of the pandemic. I want to welcome several of the other core and key city leaders, as well as other city leaders from around the world who are joining us today. Whilst there are many challenges that we face, there are also huge opportunities. And I think as the pandemic starts to ease and we can see the path to the future, we need to seize this moment as the next stage in the evolution of our cities. This will require vision and leadership, which I believe all our cities here today have, but it will also require the will of national governments to support us, to provide the right policy and legislative environment, the right resources, the right freedoms, the right flexibilities to be able to get on and do the job of delivering for our citizens. Here in the UK, we have a very centralised system of governance. Core cities have led a process and an argument for decentralisation and devolution, but I believe we need to be more ambitious and go much further. And I believe that there's much we can learn in the UK from the cities gathered here today globally, not least because our cities are forces for democratic participation in an age which increasingly seems to be disinterested in these principles that we as progressive leaders hold dear. Our cities are for our people. It's our people that should shape them. But we need to do that in a way that preserves and protects our democracies and makes people understand that, challenging and imperfect though it can be, democracy is by far the most important form of government we've ever invented. So, as our joint statement sets out, as global facing cities, we all share common values of openness, tolerance, and the need to address poverty and inequality, as well as promote sustainability for the future. By continuing our shared dialogue, by building collaboration and solidarity, we can learn from each other and find new ways to turn these values into action. I'm delighted with the overwhelmingly positive response to this event. And I want to personally thank each and every one of you and all of your officials for the efforts that I know you've already made to arrive at this point and make this event such a huge success. My hope is that our dialogue today isn't just a one-off, but will become part of a regular and complementary part of the future G7 process. And I know that we're looking forward to further dialogue with our respective networks and organisations to ensure we can follow this through, not just ahead of COP26, but long-term into the future, to put cities at the heart of our economic renewal, our policy development, our tackling inequalities, our tackling poverty, and our approach to tackling the global climate emergency. Welcome, everybody. To invite our representative from the OECD, who's Lamia Kamal Shoei, to give us a brief presentation before we get on to the contributions. So you see, we can all make mistakes, but we're now back on track. Lamia, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nick. Can you hear me well? It's okay?
Yes, I can hear you fine. Thank you.
Great. So dear mayors, participants, friends, colleagues, really great pleasure to be with you. Well, I was asked for this event to share with you a few findings from the work that we have been conducted at the OECD on cities and regions since the onset of the pandemic, to take stock of the impact and discuss prospects for the recovery. So the aim is basically to set the scenes for your discussion, mayors. So I'm going to share my screen now because I have a PowerPoint presentation. And can you see it? Is it okay? Great.
Yes, we can see that. Thanks, Lamia.
Great. So the first thing that I like to do, Nick, is really to start with some good news. The good news is that prospects for the global economy today look a lot brighter than a few months ago. And last week, the OECD launched its economic outlook, which anticipates global growth of 5.8% in 2021, bringing most of the world back to pre-pandemic GDP levels by the end of 2022. So this represents a sharp upwards revision from our previous projection data dates back from December. And as you can see on this graph, however, the recovery is very uneven across countries. We can see that, for instance, Korea and the United States are already at pre-pandemic per capita output level, while much of Europe, including the United Kingdom, is expected to take nearly 3 years to recover. And emerging market economy, highlighted there by the green bars, are likely to take more time to recover. And this difference in the strength of economic recovery across countries actually reflects, the different degrees of success in implementing public health measures, including vaccination, as well as economic measures. And in the case of the US, the scale of the fiscal stimulus, of course, has a big impact. But as just the recovery is uneven between countries, it is also uneven within countries, in part because not all places were equally prepared to face the crisis, but also because not all places have the same capacity to rebound. And at the OECD, we have been tracking the impact of COVID-19 within countries since the onset of the pandemic, and we have seen very different health, social, and economic outcomes between places, as well as different impact on subnational finance. And it has quickly become very clear that COVID-19 was working to reinforce existing economic inequalities between places, or even more, exacerbate them. So let us first look at health outcomes with this map on the screen. The data that we collected from January to September 2020 show that the pandemic hit large metropolitan regions in red on the map much harder than other type of places, with the average excess mortality being almost twice as high as in remote regions. And some large cities, actually, they saw an increase in deaths of over 50% as compared to the previous year. Of course, we have been talking a lot about urban density, and urban density matters, but what has really made a difference on health outcomes is the number of hospital beds available, the level of air pollution, and more generally, public policies in place. And of course, today, the pace of the vaccination campaign. We are currently tracking the progress of vaccination campaign at subnational level, and we have a tracker on our website. We can see that regional disparities remain quite limited, but they do exist in some countries, which can be explained by social health and demographic factors across regions. Our data also highlighted the significant regional differences in terms of the share of jobs at risk from lockdown measures, which you can see on the map on the slide. This measure looks at the share of employment in each place in high-risk sectors, with red indicating places with the greatest share of jobs at risk. Tradable sectors and their supply chains were particularly hard hit initially. So this is mainly in the manufacturing sectors, but also accommodation and food, wholesale and retail, as well as art and entertainment, also account for most jobs in occupations at risk. So in terms of regional differences, our data shows that the share of jobs at risk from lockdown could exceed 35% in some tourist destinations, for instance, in South European and Korean islands, but also in more highly interconnected, dense location in Japan. Within countries, people living in more vulnerable areas, such as poor urban neighborhoods, in crowded living conditions, or who could not telework, were hit particularly hard. And this map of Wales on the screen, for instance, shows that how COVID cases have been concentrated in some poor districts. We have seen in New York City two COVID cases cluster in the Bronx from the start. In Paris, Ile-de-France region, the WISE department was among the first clusters. So this was a feature everywhere. But we have also seen that some cities and towns in rural areas also proved vulnerable due to the larger shares of older residents, more limited access to health infrastructure, and low shares of jobs amenable to remote working. So overall, the geography of the crisis highlighted that our regions and cities are not equally resilient. We knew it, but the effects were really striking. And in addition, we have also to consider that many areas were already struggling going into the crisis and now may face more difficulties to recover. Prior to COVID, regional disparities were already prevalent, and actually they were deepening. The chart on the screen shows that while disparities across countries have reduced since the early 2000s, disparities within countries have widened. And this is particularly the case in France, Poland, Italy, and the United States. And there is a clear pattern within countries with metropolitan region growing faster than smaller cities, especially in rural areas. We have seen that the gap between the two types of region has increased by 3 percentage points since 2008. And overall, 2/3 of OECD countries have regions where productivity has stagnated or declined for a decade. And in the same vein, our data shows that many regions in OECD countries had still not recovered to 2008 unemployment level by 2018. And this measure does not count the people who drop out of the labor force altogether. I'm thinking about discouraged workers. Reactivating these people has proved to be especially difficult. So already pre-COVID, regional gaps in inactivity rates reach 15 percentage points or more in some countries, and these divides could deepen even further now with the new situation. So how much a region or a city is affected by the crisis and is able to recover depends on, of course, several factors. Its economic and industrial specialization, which I already mentioned, but also its labor market profile, and as well the share of job that can be done remotely, which has played a huge role in sustaining economic activity in some regions during the crisis, the so-called teleworkability. Despite the challenges faced by large cities, including density and air quality, they have been better protected than some regions by the ability to switch to teleworking. They have many more jobs that are amenable to remote working than other places, actually 13% more on average than smaller cities and towns in rural areas. And we have some capital region like Île-de-France, Paris, London, Stockholm, Brussels, Prague, which have more than half of jobs amenable to remote working. So going forward, many places will need to adapt to this new normal, as many companies now look to shift to some form of regular teleworking. Cities may see an outflow of workers whose jobs are no longer tied to physical offices. On the other hand, we are seeing that some mid-sized cities, provided that they are wired to accommodate the long-term teleworking trend, may find opportunities to attract a growing share of teleworker. So the resilience of cities and regions to the impact of the pandemic and their capacity to recover as well depends on the fiscal situation of subnational government. And we have been able to track the fiscal impact of the crisis on regional and local governments thanks to our World Observatory on Subnational Finance, ICLEI, United Cities and Local Governments in the meeting. It's a joint initiative with UCLG, and obviously the pandemic has resulted in huge pressure from both increased expenditures and from declining revenues. All subnational governments have been fiscally impacted by the crisis, but some more than others. And our data shows that large cities, more than 500,000 inhabitants, expect to be hit the hardest. But the impact, of course, on local public finances also depend on many factors: the city's spending responsibility, the stability of the revenue base, the contingent plans and background fiscal head. And of course, the impact also depends on the type of the support they get from higher level of governance. So we need to continue to track this trend because this will have an important outcome on the recovery. So overall, COVID-19 has exacerbating growing regional disparity and has brought new challenges for cities and regions that will have to be addressed in the post-COVID recovery strategy. But we have also to remember that already pre-COVID, cities and regions were facing major pressures to adapt from other global megatrends: digitalization, globalization, demographic change, including aging, the future of work, and the question of automation, climate change. All this pressure, they have not gone away. So I'd like to just illustrate one megatrend: climate change and environmental degradation, which continue to put huge pressure on cities, and it's going to be the case going forward. So for the first time, we have been able to collect data on cities and metropolitan areas in the whole world, including comparable indicator on population, built-up areas, air quality, and density for all cities. And you could find all this data in our publication and on the website. Some of these data showed actually that average temperatures have increased in many cities around the world during the last 50 years. And since 1970, what we call cooling needs, I mean, what experts call cooling degree days, which is a measure for how long and by how much outside air temperature was above 22 degrees Celsius. These cooling needs have increased by almost 25% in cities. This is really huge. In Europe, southern region experience higher increases in cooling needs, and they have doubled in Athens, for instance, and in Taranto in Italy since 1970. So these are new data that's quite impressive. Another one that I wanted to show you is the question of deforestation, which has, as we know, a huge impact on climate and biodiversity. And here, our data show that the tree cover has declined in more than half of cities between 1992 and 2008. This is really, really alarming. The most severe impact is happening in North America and in Australia, as you can see on the map. So I've just selected here some data. We have many more, but this is really to illustrate the fact that climate change and the transition to a zero carbon emission should really be at the core of recovery strategy going forward. So let me now turn to what cities and regions have done to respond to the crisis and how they are starting to do things to shape a brighter future. So we have been keeping tabs on cities' policy responses. We have produced a note that is available in different languages where we have collected information from more than 100 cities around the world since March 2020. And what we have seen is that when we first published the note last March, most of the new policy were basically targeting emergency measures designed to protect lives. And as you can see on the slide, these measures range from raising awareness and implementing social distancing measures to supporting local businesses and vulnerable groups and economic sector that were particularly affected, such as culture and creative sectors. But over the months, we have observed a change. Many cities now are seeking to turn this crisis into an opportunity to put in place measures that will help them build more resilience over the longer term. And we have seen cities, for instance, accelerating the digitalization of public services and businesses, including support for SMEs. We have seen cities taking action to support better access to goods and services, including through more walkable and cyclable neighborhood. We have seen cities making investment in more sustainable production and consumption that support the transition to a circular economy. And we have seen cities redesigning and reclaiming urban spaces, for instance, by rezoning office district to expand the supply of housing. So we see that cities around the world are not trying to build back better. No, they are not trying to do that. They are trying to build forward better by reinventing themselves in new creative ways. And in many cases, these investments in cities are long overdue, which is why there is really a compelling cases for giving them priority in national recovery plan. So what I want to do to conclude is to focus on some of our key messages that we have developed for national governments. Because the OECD, the role of the OECD is to serve national government. We work with local government, but we want to bridge the gap between the two levels. So the first thing is that in our different committees dealing with regional and local development, we have been making the case that recovery plans should embrace a place-based approach. And the fact is that in majority of countries, regions and cities are really key public investors, and in the OECD they account to close to 60% of public investment. You all know this data, But when we talk to national government, it's really strange to see that many of them are really surprised. The uncertainty raised by this crisis is really forcing regions and cities to postpone or even cancel their investment. And here, there is a big risk. There is a big risk that in the medium term, subnational public investment becomes an adjustment variable, as it happened after the 2008 crisis. So this is a very strong message that we are trying to push, is that subnational public investment, which was cut back in many OECD countries at that time, it was really a bad thing because it took a decade to reach the pre-crisis level again. So this recovery should be an opportunity to do things differently and to design and invest in the right place-based investment strategy, because especially blind approach will not work. And I think we should all say that loud and clear. There is a lot of opportunity in many countries to do that. And just to flag the work that we have been doing with UK core cities, really present a particular opportunity for national government to implement a place-based approach in its recovery strategy. We worked together last year. We published a report on productivity in UK core cities, which showed that the 11 core UK cities and their functional urban areas, they generate 14 percentage points lower output per worker than the UK average. And this is the lowest level relative to the national average among second-tier cities in large OECD countries such as Germany, Japan, the Netherlands, or France, as shown in the graph. So these cities are really held back by poor skills and infrastructure, limited local autonomy. Nick, you mentioned that. So there is here, again, a huge untapped potential in the UK core cities, which actually now can be addressed by the national government in its recovery strategy. So let me conclude with just some information on how we are supporting regions and cities in the recovery. 4 things. First, we are providing targeted support to some cities, including the UK core cities, but also Aix-Marseille in France, Rotterdam, really helping mayors and regional leaders to develop their ambitious forward-looking recovery strategy. We are working with the 60 mayors of the OECD Coalition of Champion Mayors for Inclusive Growth. Some are with us today, to make sure that mayors, leaders commit to put inclusive growth and the just transition at the core of their recovery strategy. We are in the process of developing a new COVID-19 territorial recovery platform. This is mainly for national government to help them track the territorial dimension of recovery strategies across levels of government with both quantitative and qualitative information. And finally, we are going to release soon the OECD UN Habitat report on the state, the global state of national urban policies in 162 countries. And this report will showcase how national governments can leverage their urban policies to contribute to the recovery, including in terms of green policy and investment. So thank you very much. Looking forward to hearing the discussion from the mayors.
Thank you very much, Lamia. That was a really interesting overview and presentation. There was so much detail in there. I know we'll be all very interested in following that up. And I know that the presentation has already been circulated by email, but Emily has also just, I think, just about to post it in the chat function as well, if you haven't got that. So thank you very much. And hopefully the themes that you just ran through there will be themes that we'll pick up in the rest of our discussion. I was perhaps a little ahead of myself and very excited to hear from Canada first. But now it is time to go to Mike in Canada, and Mayor Mike Savage from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and also
I lost it. Good morning. Can you hear me okay? Are we good? All right. Yeah, I'm Mayor Mike Savage, and I'm the mayor of Halifax.
Welcome, and it'd be great to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor. Very pleased to be invited to this group. I am the mayor of Halifax, which is on the east coast of Canada. It is approximately just past 7:30 in the morning here, 4 hours different from London. I also want to acknowledge that I am coming to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, who are the indigenous people of this land, and we honor their history and work on a future together. Federation of Canadian Municipalities represents about 90% of Canadian people, and the Big City Mayors Caucus, of which I'm now the chair, brings together representatives from 22 of Canada's largest cities, offering a forum for discussions and proposing action on a range of issues, and we work very closely with the current Canadian government in nation building through city building. As we all know, municipalities are the level of government that is closest to where people work, where they raise their families, where they manage their businesses. And as also, as Nick has referred to, we live in a time of multiple crises. We have a health crisis, which has led to an economic crisis. We have a social justice crisis embodied in North America, certainly, and around the world through organizations like Black Lives Matter. And of course, we have the existential crisis of our time, which is climate. After seeing inequity on stark display over the past number of months, Canadians want an inclusive recovery whose benefits are widely shared. They want a country that's more sustainable and resilient to threats, whether that's virus, economic, or climate. And of course, our cities have a really key role to play. Municipal leaders turn investments into outcomes, whether that's responding to the pandemic, whether it's creating jobs in healthy communities, or raising the level of ambition in addressing climate change. The impacts of climate change and natural disasters, as well as the repercussions of poorly designed climate policy, will disproportionately fall on lower income households, racialized communities, marginalized communities, as well as women and girls. These adverse impacts will compound inequality in our communities if left unaddressed. Cities have a responsibility to encourage national governments to take equity-centered approaches, including conducting gender-based analysis when implementing policy and programs. I believe we must ensure that national decision-making reduces inequality and supports climate justice around the world. Municipalities influencing half of the emissions in Canada, local action falls upon us to achieve our targets. Achieving net zero by 2050, in Halifax, we will achieve net zero in our municipal operations by 2030, and to pursue efforts to limit global temperature increase. So we must continue to demonstrate leadership at the local level by, for example, using evidence-based decision-making, testing innovative financing mechanisms, developing net zero carbon budgeting tools, or implementing local net zero pathways. Canadian innovations like Canada's new federal permanent transit fund, which my colleagues and I have pursued for years, will really help create a national enabling environment that is critical for successful net zero cities. So FCM has been funding innovative, sustainable solutions for more than 20 years through programs like the Green Municipal Fund, advancing local climate solutions and financing municipal priorities like retrofitting homes, community housing, and public buildings. So we need to continue to share these success stories with other countries, including forums such as today, and learn the successes from your communities. I think as we move closer to COP26, municipalities are ready to lead in a green and inclusive recovery that creates jobs, improves lives, and helps our countries achieve net zero GHG emissions. So on behalf of Canada's largest cities, really appreciate the opportunity to be here. We look forward to deepening our relationship with your cities and advancing the progress that we have made and talking about the progress that we must make at our local, national, and international level. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mike. And really important question you raised there around how do we influence our national governments? And we might want to come back to that in a more free-flowing discussion later on. Let's hear now from Hermano Sanchez-Rivo, who's the Deputy Mayor of Paris in France.
Merci, thank you everybody. Hello to everybody. Permettez-moi dans un premier temps, au nom de la maire de Paris, de vous faire part de la joie qui est la nôtre de participer à ce sommet. Paris est honoré de participer auprès de tant d'autres villes à ce premier format qui nous réunit quelques jours avant le sommet des nations du G7 ce vendredi. Ce sommet a lieu dans un contexte particulier, sans précédent, celui du réveil du multilatéralisme. Les pays du G7 ont de nombreux challenges à relever. L'importance d'un travail de collaboration entre villes, entre États, en Europe et dans le reste du monde est devenue absolument vitale. Petit à petit, nous avons tous été amenés à nous questionner sur la pérennité de nos systèmes économiques pour faire face aux challenges qui sont collectivement les nôtres. Mais nous, chers collègues, en tant que ville, que devons-nous faire? Nous le savons, les villes et les habitants des villes sont les premières victimes du réchauffement climatique ou de la pandémie. Mais les villes sont surtout les acteurs des changements à opérer, que ce soit en France, que ce soit en Europe, ou que ce soit dans le reste du monde. C'est dans ce contexte enthousiasmant et exigeant que nos villes doivent impulser des changements pour permettre un avenir plus vert, plus inclusif, tout en tirant les conséquences de la crise sanitaire, sociale et écologique que nous vivons. Les États, nos États, avancent en ce sens et remettent de nombreux dogmes bien installés en place. Je pense par exemple à cette volonté des membres du G7 Finance d'instaurer une taxe mondiale sur les multinationales, décision qui redéfinirait en profondeur les règles de l'économie mondiale telles qu'elles existent depuis les années 80. En ce moment historique, les villes aussi doivent repenser leur fonctionnement, s'adapter aux enjeux du XXIe siècle. À Paris, nous portons avec Anne Hidalgo un projet plus et autour et pour plus de proximité, qui est notre contribution à la réflexion commune sur l'adaptation de nos villes aux défis de proximité. Ces dernières années, l'objectif des réformes administratives en France était en effet surtout d'obtenir un poids important dans la mondialisation. Nous étions en France dans le Big is Beautiful. Cela s'est matérialisé avec la création des grandes métropoles et le doublement des régions françaises, un peu comme cette idée de se rapprocher de la taille des Länder allemands, par exemple. Désormais, à l'initiative de la ville de Paris et après la pandémie, nous faisons le choix de développer à l'inverse une grande réflexion sur notre gouvernance en mettant en avant le concept de ville du quart d'heure, la ville du quart d'heure. C'est un concept forgé par le professeur Carlos Moreno et qui promeut l'idée d'une ville de proximité comme modèle idéal après la pandémie. Tous les services essentiels doivent être ainsi à 15 minutes à pied ou bien à vélo. Alors bien entendu, cette idée de la ville du quart d'heure n'est pas une baguette magique. Il faut l'adapter aux conditions locales et aux réalités de chaque ville. Mais nous espérons qu'avec cette promotion du « small is beautiful »,« local is beautiful », ce soit un véritable Big Bang administratif. Il doit prendre en compte toutes les réalités. Nous n'en serons que meilleurs en termes de citoyenneté, d'écologie, de démocratie. Son importance est telle qu'il permettra de redonner du souffle à notre démocratie. Ce projet nous permettra, nous l'espérons, de faire de Paris une ville plus verte et plus inclusive par la profonde transformation de l'administration parisienne, qui fera de la gouvernance locale la norme en déléguant l'action municipale au plus près des citoyens, par des réformes sectorielles en termes de propreté, d'entretien, de sécurité, par le développement de services d'hyper-proximité et par le renforcement d'une démocratie locale à travers, par exemple, le budget participatif que nous avons mis en place en 2014. L'expérience nous l'a montré, les décisions les plus adaptées sont celles prises par l'échelon le mieux placé, au plus près du réel. Nous parviendrons ainsi à résoudre les problématiques qui nous incombent plus que jamais. Nos villes sont d'importants pôles démographiques et économiques, essentiels au dynamisme des économies régionales et mondiales. Ce sont des réels centres d'innovation capables de trouver de nouvelles façons de s'adapter et de prospérer à la sortie de cette pandémie. Leur rôle de premier plan dans la réussite d'un avenir post-Covid n'est plus à prouver. En ce sens, nous devons de travailler et de collaborer ensemble. Nos efforts, nos échanges de bonnes pratiques sont, j'en suis convaincu, primordiaux à l'avènement d'un avenir plus prospère, plus inclusif et plus fort. À Paris, nous sommes convaincus que cette notion, nous laissons ici cette notion de ville du quart d'heure, peut participer au débat pour répondre notamment aux enjeux politiques que nous avons tous en commun. Merci à tous.
Hermano, thank you so much for such insightful thoughts. And in particular, I know many of us are very, very interested in the 15-minute neighborhood concept as a way of revitalizing our cities for the future. And so I think that might well be a thread of learning that we might want to share globally in the future. Let's now hear from Burkhard Jung, who is president of the Deutsche Städtetag and mayor of Leipzig in Germany.
Ja, ganz, ganz herzlichen Dank. Ich hoffe, Sie können mich hören. Ich freue mich sehr. Kollege Forb, vielen Dank für die wunderbare Begrüßung und danke, dass ich hier dabei sein kann und sprechen kann zu dem Thema, was uns alle bewegt. Wie können wir uns als Städte einbringen in die Diskussion des Wandels? Nicht nur Covid-19, sondern in die anderen großen Themen, die angesprochen sind, Globalisierung, Digitalisierung und, Inklusion und so weiter. Die Covid-19-Pandemie, wenn ich damit anfangen darf, hat enorme Auswirkungen auf unsere Städte gehabt. Dem Einzelhandel hat die Krise stark zugesetzt. Ich möchte diesen Aspekt mal betonen, weil er uns in besonderer Weise in Deutschland betrifft, aber vielleicht auch weit darüber hinaus. Ich hörte von den französischen Kollegen und auch von den britischen Kollegen ganz Ähnliches. Der Onlinehandel boomt, kulturelles Leben findet gar nicht mehr oder nur sehr eingeschränkt statt. Der Wegfall von Einnahmen bei gleichzeitig höheren Ausgaben bedrückt uns. Ich glaube, weltweit ist die finanzielle Handlungsfähigkeit unter Druck. Und so haben wir große Befürchtungen, dass wir notwendige kommunale Investitionen stoppen oder verschieben müssen, uns neu verschulden müssen. Die Folgen sind für unsere Bürgerinnen und Bürger spürbar im Kita-Bau, im Schulhausbau, in der Verkehrswende, beim ÖPNV, so wichtig für die Klimawende, bei dem Thema Digitalisierung und insgesamt beim Klimaschutz. In Deutschland ist es so, dass etwa 60% der Investitionen von den Kommunen, von den Städten ausgelöst werden. Und ohne diese Investitionen wird auch die Wirtschaft nicht mehr anspringen. Insofern tun wir gut daran, dies auch auf nationaler Ebene oder föderaler Ebene, in der regionalen Ebene immer wieder zu betonen. Gemeinsam muss es uns gelingen, gegenzusteuern. Die Covid-19-Pandemie und auch der Klimawandel sind die großen Herausforderungen, vor denen wir stehen. Wir wollen aber lebenswerte Orte bleiben. Wir wollen lebenswerte, lebensqualitätsvolle Orte sein und wir brauchen dafür neue Konzepte und neuen Wandel. Wir engagieren uns. Die Städte ducken sich nicht weg. Wir übernehmen Verantwortung. Wir wollen gestalten vor Ort in unseren Städten über Grenzen hinweg. Und deshalb freue ich mich, dass wir im Netzwerk aller Vertreterinnen und Vertreter weltweit heute hier zusammenkommen können. Wir kooperieren in Städtepartnerschaften, in Städtenetzwerken miteinander. Wir bringen Ideen und Akteure zusammen. Für mich ist es unglaublich bereichernd, zum Beispiel im Netzwerk von EUROCITIES einander auszutauschen, Projekte zu erfahren, zu kopieren. Ich darf das mal etwas scherzhaft sagen. Wir dürfen hemmungslos voneinander abschreiben und Ideen übernehmen, Ideen stehlen von anderen Städten, weil es uns bindet, vor Ort für unsere Menschen das Beste zu suchen. Wir entwickeln Lösungsansätze, wir sind für grenzüberschreitende Herausforderungen aufgestellt und wir gehen voran. Weltweit haben sich tausende Städte Klimaziele gesetzt, die weit über die nationalen Bemühungen zum Klimaschutz hinausgehen, weil wir sehr wohl um die Verantwortung auch der Städte wissen. Der Beitrag der Städte zur Reduzierung der CO2-Emissionen, der muss allerdings viel sichtbarer gemacht werden. Ich glaube, wir sind zu still in dieser Frage. Wir müssen mehr klingeln. Im Transparenzrahmen der Vereinten Nationen zum Beispiel werden Regeln definiert, anhand derer die Mitglieder über ihre Treibhausgasemissionen und ihren Fortschritt bei der Umsetzung ihrer nationally determined contributions berichten müssen. Um den Fortschritt beurteilen zu können, müssen zukünftig auch die Fortschritte der Kommunen, die sogenannten locally determined contributions, dargestellt werden, nach meiner Überzeugung. Gemeinsam sind ambitionierter Klimaschutz und die Einhaltung des Pariser Abkommens und der Agenda 2030 für nachhaltige Entwicklung machbar. Und ein Schlüssel dafür sind klimagerechte und nachhaltige Städte, die eigenverantwortlich, autonom mit ihrer Bürgerschaft in der Zivilgesellschaft handeln. Und dafür wünschen wir uns sehr, dass die Städtenetzwerke als Partner der Regierung akzeptiert werden, auf der nationalen Ebene oder der europäischen Ebene. Ein Zeichen wäre die Aufnahme der Städte in die nationalen Delegationen im Rahmen der Weltklimakonferenzen. Insofern großartig die Idee der Kollegen aus Manchester, dass wir heute hier so als G7-Städte zusammenkommen können. Damit Städte handlungsfähig bleiben und der Wandel gelingt, braucht es darüber hinaus noch echte Mehr-Ebenen-Governance mit gemeinsamer Verantwortung und finanzieller Unterstützung. Ich wünsche mir sehr, dass wir in diese globalen Prozesse stärker als Städtenetzwerk eingebunden werden, und der heutige Urban Summit ist dafür ein starkes Signal. Ich möchte dafür arbeiten, dass dieses Momentum genutzt werden kann, mit Leben gefüllt werden kann und vielleicht im kommenden Jahr, wenn G7-Gipfel in Deutschland stattfindet, wir auch daran anknüpfen. Es sollte nicht nur eine einmalige Geschichte werden, sondern wir sollten versuchen, dieses Beispiel aus diesem Jahr in den nächsten Jahren fortzusetzen und uns auf die Ebene, auf das Niveau heben, um mitzureden, wenn es darum geht, die Welt in besserem Sinne zu verändern und menschlicher zu gestalten, um die globalen Herausforderungen zu meistern. Vielen Dank für die Möglichkeit, diese Gedanken Ihnen mitteilen zu können.
Thank you so much, Burkhard. And that point that you covered there around and ended on around wanting to make us integral. I think any nation, any national government that doesn't listen to its major cities is a nation which is not going to recover and is going to fail. And we saw the examples of that in the initial presentation from Lamia. And there's so much we can do to not just revitalize our cities, but position our cities as engines of growth for the future. So thank you for such positive and constructive thoughts. We'll now hear from Dario Nardella, who is president of EUROCITIES and mayor of Florence in Italy. And I do have to say, Dario, Florence is a city I know extremely well. I'm very fond of it. I've had many happy times there. So it's great to have you on the call today. Dario.
Oh, thank you, President Forbes. I'm waiting you in Florence as soon as possible, obviously. And I'm very happy and glad to be here, dear mayors, dear UK core cities and OECD colleagues. Thank you for the opportunity to participate here today, both as President of EUROCITIES, the main European Mayors Network, and Mayor Florence, and also on behalf of Italian mayors. And we have seen in our cities how hard this pandemic and crisis has hit. I am sure we all hope that the vaccination campaign will turn the situation around. And I would like also to thank the G7 leaders for the decision to support the COVAX program. But we must remain vigilant about the economic and social implications in our cities and the surrounding areas, as you told us. To build a more inclusive and greener society for the future, we need the right legislative frameworks, investments, and partnership approaches. In EUROCITIES, we are working on all three aspects, but I would like to highlight partnerships. We have asked the European Commission to set up a structured dialogue on the implementation of the national recovery plans involving local and regional authorities directly at the European level. Cities must be able to provide relevant information to the European Union to assess implementation, identify effective approaches, challenges, and gaps. It would help close the gap in the development of the national recovery plans, where cities have had a very limited role in most member states. And this is one of the crucial points that I would like to underline. To boost recovery internationally, EUROCITIES is part of the International Urban Cooperation Program financed by the European Commission. And we are working with cities across the world on the green and digital transformation to share our innovations and learn from others. As cities, I think we can do a lot together to reach our shared goals. I would like to highlight 2 points. Firstly, let's make the most of our city networks. As president of EUROCITIES, I see benefits of city-to-city exchange. When we learn from each other and share our successes and failures, we move forward faster. This is even more important in times of crisis, of course. And in EUROCITIES, we have seen an increase in the need to work together during the pandemic, lockdown, and the crisis in many of our urban sectors. How do we support the most vulnerable, our local businesses? How do we get the children back to school? I see in my own city that this collaboration is a strong source of inspiration for doing new things back home. I'm convinced that it's a strong contribution also to the recovery in Europe. Secondly, we can reinforce our collective power, and in my association, we are launching the Mayors Alliance for the Green Deal in partnership with the European Climate Foundation. We will showcase the work done by cities and mayors to implement the European Green Deal locally. We want to show that a sustainable transition to a climate-neutral society is possible and that cities are leading the way in many ways. It should be crystal clear to the European leaders that working with cities will be essential to the success of the Green Deal. I think that we can have success without a real and concrete involvement of the mayors and cities. This is an important message to share before COP26 in Glasgow in November. If you agree and on that point, you should join the alliances as soon as possible. And the more we are to stand together, the stronger is our leadership for a green and fair recovery in the EU. And finally, I am completely agree with my friend, the mayor of Leipzig, Burkhard Jung, about the possibility to organize each year during the G7 a meeting like that, because our goal is to monitor, to have a continued monitoring of our engagement and our collaboration. So thank you for your attention to everybody.
Dario, thank you so much for sharing not just an Italian perspective, but also a EuroCities perspective. And we have a saying in English, I'm not sure how well it translates into other languages, about let's not reinvent the wheel. And I think the point that you're making very powerfully is that there's so much learning that we can do in real time from each other as we recover from this pandemic, and use our recovery not to turn the clock backwards, but to look to the future and to try to shape a better future with fewer inequalities, less poverty, and with a commitment to zero carbon. And that, I think, is a very powerful political message for us to get out of the event today. And I know that we're all looking forward to working with you and other colleagues ahead of COP26. I think there is further to go in terms of making sure that local government and city leadership is seen as an integral part of COP26 by all of our nations participating. Now I'd like to turn to Japan and welcome the president of the Mayors Association of Designated Cities, the mayor of Yokohama, Fumiko Hayashi, who I believe that the deputy mayor of Yokohama, Kasumi Kobayashi, will be speaking on behalf of the mayor.
はい、皆様こんにちは。横浜市副市長の小林和美でございます。各都市のリーダーの皆様、ご参加の皆様、本日はこのような貴重な機会をいただいたことに心より感謝を申し上げます。 本日は市長の林が出席することが叶わず、誠に申し訳ございません。市長に代わりましてご発言をいたします。現在、横浜ではコロナウイルス感染症の克服に向けまして、あらゆる関係者が一丸となってワクチン接種を着実に進めています。市民の安全安心をお守りするとともに、経済の再生や新たな日常への取り組みを加速させるため、ワクチン接種も含め、これまでに総額約9000億円に上る予算を計上いたしております。その中で SDGs に対する地域課題解決と新たな生活様式を両立する先駆的な事業の支援に向けて、これまでに83の団体に補助金を交付いたしました。引き続きコロナウイルス感染症への対応と環境を意識した復興に向けまして、スピーディーかつ細やかに対応してまいります。横浜市は2018年に2050年までの温室効果ガス排出ゼロとするゼロカーボン横浜を宣言いたしました。昨年10月には日本政府として菅総理大臣が2050年までの脱炭素社会の実現を宣言されました。この宣言においては、国と地方による新たな検討の場の創設が示され、官房長官を議長とする国地方脱炭素実現会議が設置されました。林文子横浜市長もこの会議の委員として参加しています。さらには、林市長が全国のゼロカーボンシティに呼びかけ、2月にゼロカーボン市区町村協議会を設立し、地方のニーズ、都市の要望を国に届けています。現在、約180の自治体にご参加をいただいています。本日第3回目となる国地方脱炭素実現会議が開催されまして、今回も林市長が出席をいたしてございます。今後も協議会の会長都市として国と密接に連携しつつ、全国の自治体をリードしていきます。横浜市は海外との連携も積極的に進めておりまして、特にアジアの諸都市との連携に力を入れています。都市づくりと、それを支える市内企業の技術やノウハウを生かした国際技術協力、ワイポート事業に2011年から取り組んでいます。各都市の計画策定の支援をはじめ、ベトナム・ダナン市での浄水場設備の高効率化や、タイ・バンコク都での太陽光発電、先進的エネルギーマネジメントシステムによる電力供給などを進め、脱炭素化に貢献をしています。これまで築き上げてきた実績やネットワークを土台に、日本、そしてアジアにおけるゼロカーボンシティの実現に貢献していきます。現在、世界人口の 55% 以上が都市部に居住していると言われています。持続可能でインクルーシブな世界を実現するためには、我々大都市の果たすべき役割は極めて大きいものがあります。世界の各都市が力を結集し、G7 に向けて声を上げていくことが、気候変動、コロナウイルス感染症という地球規模の課題を克服するためにも不可欠でございます。この美しい地球を次の世代につないでいくため、共に手を携え挑戦していきましょう。ありがとうございます。
Deputy Mayor Kobayashi, thank you so much for those comments on behalf of Mayor Hayashi. And the sense of the role of cities in decarbonizing our economies that you spoke so passionately and eloquently about is one of the themes that I think runs through almost everything that we've heard from all of our speakers so far. I'd now like to invite Mayor Frank Cowney, who represents both the United States Conference of Mayors and, of course, is himself the mayor of Des Moines in the USA. Mayor Cowney.
Thank you. Honorable mayors, councilors, ladies and gentlemen, I want to begin by thanking our host, UK Core Cities and Councillor Nick Forbes for bringing us together. You know, your vision has opened up a new avenue for engagement, and I'm hopeful that the Urban 7, U7, will serve as a platform to ensure that world leaders are listening to local governments. I'm here today representing America's mayors. The U.S. Conference of Mayors brings together over 1,400 American cities to coordinate policy, share best practices, and move our common agenda forward domestically and internationally. Right now, we are focused on the climate emergency. That's why I'm here today, why I ran for president of ICLEI Global, and why we all must work tirelessly to implement the necessary changes locally and advocate for the right policies globally. In Des Moines, we are committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 45% between 2010 and 2030, achieving net zero emissions by 2050, and achieving 100% 24/7 carbon-free electricity by the year 2035. There's a lot we can do at the local level to confront climate. We need global leadership. We need our national leaders to step up and partner with local governments to address these challenges. This past April, the United States hosted a global climate summit in which President Biden announced a new national determined contribution, an ambitious goal that declares to the international community that the United States federal government is back. We are proud of the Biden-Harris administration re-engagement in the global climate negotiations, and we are working closely with Secretary John Kerry's team to make COP26, to make the Glasgow a generational meeting where we set a new bold agenda and raise the world's commitment to addressing the climate emergency. To do this, we need to ensure that the COP26 is attended by a broad group of representatives from all countries, developed and developing, and from all sectors of our societies. A diverse set of stakeholders represented in Glasgow will ensure that decisions made and policies adopted have the broadest possible support. We as local leaders understand the need for political support when confronted by difficult choices. The UK presidency, the G7, and the UNFCCC work together with local authorities in Glasgow must ensure that we can achieve broad participation in a successful meeting. We can help, but they must lead. We need to recommit to inclusion and ensure that leaders from around the world can come to Glasgow to be heard and advocate for their communities. We need to help those mayors, climate activists, youth activists, and civil society leaders to participate. And in doing so, we can secure a legitimate outcome to these proceedings. I want to lend my support for the U7 joint statement and highlight the need to draw on the experience of cities in decision-making as well as policy-making. The UNFCCC and its member states needs to recognize formally the role that local elected leaders play in the climate fight and provide a seat at the table for these leaders, leaders that will be responsible for implementation. The U.S. Conference of Mayors is glad that the UK has initiated this process, but it must continue with haste. We are eager to be part of the mechanism that moves forward out of today's meeting, led by global partners and national leaders. I'm also glad that our Vice President, Mayor Arve, is here with us today to represent on behalf of ICLEI, and she will speak soon. As President of ICLEI, I want to affirm that ICLEI is with you in this process and ready to be a partner in what moves forward from this meeting. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and let's all work together to confront the climate emergency. Together, we can make a huge difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. The way that you summed that up at the end let's work together, let's make a difference, I think is a very strong message that I've heard from every single speaker from each of the C7 networks that have spoken so far. And that gives me a huge sense of both opportunity, but also responsibility that we have collectively to lead this agenda forward at pace. I will come back to some of the themes that we've discussed when we open the discussion out, but we also have a number of speakers from G7 guest states and other urban networks that I'd like to hear from. So first of all, next, or rather, can I go to Australia, and let's hear from Lord Mayor Sally Capp, who is the Council of Capital City Lord Mayors, as well as being the Lord Mayor of Melbourne in Australia.
Hello, and thank you so much. It's a big hello from the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people here in Melbourne. We want to acknowledge absolutely that COVID-19 has created massive social and economic disruption in Australia, some of which has been completely devastating, but of course, much of which we must leverage for positive change. COVID-19 has been critical in showing us that we have a chance to accelerate responses to big social issues like climate change and position green industry and green jobs at the centre of our city's economic revitalisation. In Australia, our 8 state capital cities represent 80% of our population and 80% of our gross domestic product. And of course, that means we also represent the majority of our nation's carbon emissions. The future of our cities is critical to our national prosperity and well-being. Australian cities are leading the way on sustainable development and climate change action. For example, the City of Melbourne created the Melbourne Renewable Energy Project in 2017. It was the first time in Australia that a group of local governments, cultural institutions, universities and corporations collaborated to produce renewable energy. The members of that buying group combined their purchasing power to support the construction of a 39 turbine, 80 megawatt wind farm. We now use 100% renewable energy and electricity across our city. That means that all of the power to our town halls, our bank branches, universities, and even our street lights across Melbourne are powered by renewable energy. That project was so successful, we've facilitated another project, and the two combined have now reduced our total carbon emissions, not just for our organisation, but across our city by 5%. This model is scalable and replicable and is now being utilised in Sydney and Adelaide, as well as 39 other cities across our state. It will take many, many more such projects to get to our target of 0 net carbon emissions across our city by 2040. And we are working on other projects using at-scale solar and grid-scale batteries to power our cities. These are projects and models that can be shared with cities around the world. We are keen to do that, and we are keen to learn from others too. Our city's combined action to develop a future green economy has been delivered in the absence of overarching federal government policy and leadership on these issues. But we know that working together, our cities can become the renewable energy superpower in our region. We are showing that cities can make a difference and lead change. As a result of COVID-19, we know that we will not rebound to what was, but we will progress to the cities that we want to be. There is the possibility of positive change if, in the words of the wonderful poet Amanda Gorman, we are brave enough to see it and we are brave enough to be it. We commend this forum and the aspirations of this group. Thank you.
Lord Mayor, we're brave enough to be it. We're brave enough to be it. Brave enough to see it. Was that the line you used?
Yeah, well, it's brave enough to see it, brave enough to be it, and they're the great words of Amanda Gorman, the poet who was at Joe Biden's inauguration, and I think they're terrific words to guide us forward.
I think they're absolutely fantastic words to guide us forward, and they sum up so neatly our challenge, I think, as city leaders in the absence, sometimes, as you spoke of, national government or federal government policies to help us to do the things that we're ambitious to achieve for our communities and our planet. This is I'm perhaps ahead of myself in saying this, but this is starting to be one of the real emerging themes, I think, of the discussion so far. So thank you. And let's now go to Korea and Mayor Myong-seon Hwang, who is chair of the National Association of Mayors of Korea, as well as being mayor of Nonsan City in Korea.
네, 안녕하십니까. 네. 세계 지방정부의 대표자 여러분, 함께 자리하게 돼서 대단히 반갑습니다. 저는 대한민국 전국시장군수구청장 협의회 대표회장을 맡고 있는 황명선 논산시장입니다. 우리 협의회는 지방자치법에 따라서 대한민국 228개 모든 기초지방정부의 대표자가 가입하여 자치분권을 위해 활동하고 있는 협의체입니다. 6월 11일 G7 정상회의 일정과 연계하여 자치와 분권 그리고 도시의 역할 등 의제들을 심도 있게 논의하기 위한 G7 정상회의 개최를 매우 뜻깊게 생각합니다. 아울러 세계 지방정부 정상들 간의 이번 공론의 장에 대한민국 지방정부를 초대해 주신 데 대해서 닐 보브스 영국 핵심 도시회 의장님을 비롯한 여러분께 깊은 감사의 말씀을 드립니다. 작년 초부터 코로나19 바이러스가 전 세계로 확산되었습니다. 그 결과 경제 성장은 침체됐고 각 나라와 도시들마다 보건과 방역 업무의 역할을 집중하고 있습니다. 대한민국에서는 지방정부가 주도한 코로나19 대응 정책들이 혁신 사례로 인정되어서 전 국가적으로 확산이 되었습니다. 드라이브 스루 방식의 선별 검사 소설치와 재난지원금 지급은 시민들의 건강 증진과 생계 유지에 많은 도움을 주었습니다. 최근에는 중앙정부가 지방정부와 협력하여 추진하는 백신 접종도 점점 확대되고 있습니다. 앞으로 코로나19 회복 과정에서도 지방정부의 역할은 더욱더 커지고 있습니다. 지난해 6월 5일 세계 환경의 날을 맞이해서 대한민국 226개 모든 기초지방정부는 공동으로 기후위기 비상선언을 했습니다. 전국의 기초지방정부가 동시에 조직적으로 기후 비상선언을 한 것은 국제적으로 처음 있는 일이라고 합니다. 9월에는 대한민국 국회에서 기후위기 비상대응 촉구 결의안을 통과시켰고 10월에는 문재인 대통령께서 2050 탄소중립 선언을 하였습니다. 그리고 지난달 열린 P4G 서울 녹색미래 정상회의를 통해 대한민국은 개발도상국의 녹색 회복을 지원하고 탄소중립 실현을 위한 강화된 기후환경 행동망을 국제사회에 약속을 하였습니다. 이렇듯 기초지방정부에서 시작된 기후위기 비상선언은 중앙정부의 능동적 정책 변화로 가기로 이어졌습니다. 그리고 선언을 뛰어넘는 실천을 위해서 작년 7월 탄소중립 지방정부 실천연대를 발족하였고 지금 전국에 85%가 넘는 190개 기초지방정부가 가입을 하였습니다. 앞으로 우리 협의회는 탄소중립 지방정부 실천연대를 주도하여 중앙정부와 협력하고 지역의 기후위기 대응을 위해서 적극 더 노력할 예정입니다. 특히 제가 시장으로 있는 대한민국 충청남도 논산시는 내일 6월 10일 날 대한민국 환경부 그리고 현대차그룹, 롯데그룹 등과 함께 1조 5천억 원, 11억 원 유로 규모의 투자 목표가 담긴 탄소중립 실현, 수소경제 도시 전환을 위한 업무 협약을 체결합니다. 수소 연료전지 발전소, 수소 충전소, 스마트팜 등을 조성하기 위해서 에너지 전환을 위해서 앞장설 것입니다. 우리는 그간 우리의 경험을 바탕으로 전 세계의 모든 도시들이 공통으로 직면한 다양한 사회적 그리고 환경적 문제들을 함께 풀어나가야만 합니다. 도시 간 글로벌 네트워크를 구축해서 여러분들과 함께 대한민국의 사례를 설명하고 또 여러 나라 도시 지방 정부들과 함께 서로 사례를 분석할 수 있도록 지속적인 교류와 연대와 협력을 해 나가고자 합니다. 가능하다면 공동의 사무국을 설치하고 이례적인 행사가 아닌 상시적인 대화를 할 수 있었으면 좋겠습니다. 코로나 팬데믹과 기후위기 극복을 위해서 이제 국가와 국가 그리고 도시와 도시의 연대와 협력으로 지속 가능한 지구 공동체를 만들기 위해 함께 힘을 모읍시다. 감사합니다.
Thank you, Mayor Huang, and the point that you make very powerfully about connecting cities is something that I think we need to come back to as how we can do that in a new environment. One of the great advantages is that we've all, over the last 18 months, got more used to working online than meeting in person. Of course, there's nothing beats meeting face to face and actually visiting each other's cities. And I very much hope that we can do that in the future. But new technologies give us new ways of connecting. And I think the point that you make around creating a global network broadly committed to the same outcomes is something that we all want to share in. And hopefully this is the first step towards that. So thank you. Developing this theme, I suppose, let's hear next from the Global Parliament of Mayors, and in particular, Peter Kurz, who is the chair of the Global Parliament of Mayors, as well as being Mayor of Mannheim in Germany. Peter.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, dear Councillor Forbes, dear friends and colleagues. First of all, I'd like to thank UK core cities for making this happen and making cities visible during this G7 summit. Let me start with the pandemic, of course. Over the last 15 months, as city leaders, we have adapted to constantly changing conditions to meet the needs of our citizens. New public health, education, and economic challenges emerged at every turn. At the same time, the crisis has highlighted long-standing problems like climate change and inequality. Our agility and responsiveness at the local level have enabled us to address these challenges head-on. We have learned that more change is possible than we had ever imagined. You mentioned our remote meetings and working online all day, especially when cities work together. However, the COVID-19 pandemic has made clear something that we as mayors have known for years. Existing structures need to change. The local level is a decisive level of government. A prerequisite to success in addressing these global challenges is ensuring that we have the appropriate resources and competences at our disposal at the local level. The demand for real multi-level governance may seem convenient because everyone, or at least everyone at this event today, can agree that this is the correct approach. However, the demand is in fact a challenge. Real multi-level governance means sharing and devolution of power. It means local self-government and deliberation of policies with cities on the national and supranational level. Nation states believe that success depends on their power. However, success depends on performance on the ground. So sharing power is part of the success story we all want to write. Beyond the sectoral policies of nation states, we need horizontal place-based strategies to be successful economically, socially, and ecologically. I mentioned that already. And we have a lack of place-based strategies. I'm the chair of the Global Parliament of Mayors, a governance body of, for, and by mayors. As city leaders, we share a vision of the world in which mayors, cities, and city networks are equal partners in building global governance for an inclusive and sustainable world. And we are working to turn this vision into a reality. This year, the GPM has partnered with the British Council on a project about climate-related migration that is part of the official programming ahead of COP26. We are actively campaigning to bring this complex issue to the attention of national governments and to highlight the important role that local government can and must play in addressing the problem. In the coming months, we will invite all of you to join our call to action. We cannot wait for conference organizers or international organizations to make room for cities and city leaders. Today, we are coming together on the sidelines of the G7 to make our voices heard. The G7 brings together a constellation of countries that are extraordinarily wealthy and powerful. Although G7 nations make up about 10% of the world's population, they account for around 40% of the world's GDP. Of course, much of that wealth and power is concentrated in our cities. With these resources come immense responsibility. Throughout the pandemic, wealthy nations have acted in their own self-interests, buying up the vast majority of the vaccines produced, while countries in the global south have struggled to vaccinate even their frontline workers. We cannot follow this model as we address the interlinked challenges of climate change and inequality. At all levels of government, we must think globally. The world's wealthiest and most powerful countries, together with their cities, can set new standards and commit to reducing emissions, tackling climate change, and ensuring a just, equitable, and green transition. Next year, Germany will host the G7, which will give us the opportunity to continue the work we are doing here today. And I want to underline what Burkhard Jung just said. This should be the start of a structured dialogue, not a one-off event. I know that together with UK core cities, German cities, as well cities from other G7 member states, we can create a space on the sidelines of the next G7 where we can move this debate forward. As city leaders, we cannot wait for opportunities to be handed to us. We must insist on real multi-level governance. We must demand the change we need. So thank you for the opportunities to speak and for bringing us together.
Peter, thank you again for such wise words. And the point that you were reflecting about how we all must think globally is coming through very strongly. And of course, the pandemic has forced us to look inwards to our respective cities. And I know from my experience as a city leader, almost all I've had have been my place. But your comments are a reminder to us that this is the time to look outwards within, because that reminder to and backwards in terms of the future of our cities. And I very much hope that we can continue to do that together. I link to our next speaker, the deputy vice president, the vice president of ICLEI, Mayor Minna Arve, who is also mayor of Turku in Finland. We heard, of course, from Frank County, the president of ICLEI earlier. It's a great privilege also to have the vice president joining us as well. Minna, over to you.
Thank you. Dear fellow mayors, ladies and gentlemen, I am Minna Arve. I'm the mayor of Turku in Finland. And I'm truly happy to join this event. I'm delighted to join this historic event, and as a role as a vice president of ICLEI Local Governments for Sustainability, I want to thank you for the kind invitation, and especially Councillor Forbes as the president of the UK core cities. ICLEI is a global network of more than 2,500 local regional governments committed to sustainable urban development. We are active in more than 125 countries. We influence sustainability policy and drive local action for low emission, nature-based, equitable, resilient, and circular development. Building on its engagement in the global efforts on sustainability since 1990, ICLEI acts as a focal point of local and regional governments at many UN processes, in particular on climate, biodiversity, and desertification. The milestone UN agreements on sustainability around 2015 and 2016 enabled the elevation of the concept of multi-level and multi-stakeholder collaboration, where local and regional governments and their networks like ICLEI played a key role. And we are happy to see that other global processes like G7 and G20 are also embracing such principles of transparency and inclusiveness. ICLEI's first engagement with the G7 process was in 2016 during the Japanese presidency through the convening of the first Environment Ministers and Mayors Forum. In 2017, the Bonn-Fiji Commitment adopted the local and regional leaders climate summit at COP23 UN Bonn Climate Conference urged for a more active engagement with G7, G20, as well as One Belt, One Road processes. Thus, ICLEI commands the efforts of UK Core Cities Group to convene the first ever mayoral summit at the G7 process. Let's not forget that the world is rightfully expecting an ambitious leadership from G7 nations in terms of climate change, access to finance, debt relief, and recently vaccine equity and global health, pursuant to their historical and moral responsibilities as well as the technical and financial capabilities. In particular, on the climate front, in its capacity as the LGMA focal point to the UNFCCC, ICLEI invites G7 governments at all levels to make sure that COP26 in Glasgow will be the turning point for multi-level collaboration on climate action. I am especially happy to see the reference for 1.5-degree lifestyles as the basis for zero carbon future. Together with ICLEI, Turku is committed to spread the vision and actions for the 1.5 lifestyles across G7 nations and across the world. We are implementing ambitious climate actions towards carbon neutrality by 2029 and promoting circular economy. As part of our work, we are encouraging also citizens and businesses to shift towards 1.5-degree living and welcome other cities to join the 1.5-degree campaign. ICLEI supports the vision of the first ever Urban 7 Summit and endorses its outcome document. Building on its strong network and experience in global advocacy, ICLEI looks forward for an active collaboration with networks of local and regional government across G7 nations for a more systematic, regular, and long-term engagement of local and regional governments to accelerate contributions of the G7 nations in the global sustainability. As Mayor County Frank said, let's make a difference together. Thank you.
Thank you so much for reinforcing so much of what we've already heard from previous speakers and also setting out a challenge for us collectively to show leadership ahead of COP26. And I very much hope that we can not just use this emerging network to shape our approach collectively to COP26, but use that as the foundation for much stronger international collaboration in the future. So thank you, Minna. I'll now go to Emilia Sayers, who is the Secretary General of United Cities and Local Government.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity. Let me see, because I have some return and I don't know whether you can hear me well. Can you hear me well?
I'm getting feedback on the translation.
I think it might be solved now. It had to do with interpretation.
There you go, that's it.
Yes, thank you very much for this opportunity. United Cities and Local Governments is of course delighted to join the many members that we have in this meeting, and in particular co-president Hidalgo's representative, the Vice Mayor of Paris, Hermano Sanchez Ribo, in this very important and interesting dialogue. As Mayor Kurz said, I think it is really, really important that we expand our influence as local and regional governments representatives in any way that we can. And you know, as co-convener of Urban 20 together with C40, United Cities and Local Government is convinced that spaces like the G7 and G20 are spaces that need to hear more from cities and that need to establish dialogue with cities. I think the networks of cities, and I am very happy to see so many sister organizations like CLGF and ICLEI represented here. We are making big efforts to ensure that we have amplified voices and united positions in these dialogues, and I think this is still very relevant. I would like to recall some of the very important messages that are going to be put through in the coming weeks on behalf of Urban 20 to the G20, because I think they are extremely relevant also for the G7 dialogues. Strengthening health systems based around local service provision is something that I haven't heard yet here so much in this dialogue, and that might be worth thinking about. Supporting intermediary cities, because while the bigger cities are the drivers, if the intermediary cities do not fulfill their job, it will be very difficult to actually leave no one and no place behind. Investing in cultural life and also in local public service provision, specifically investment in green and just recovery, with just very much stressed, because I think that the vision of solidarity with the global south and one single universal development agenda is very important. But I would also like to highlight the importance of strengthening governance and strengthening local democracy, which is very much at the basis of good service delivery. From the studies that we have done with the London School of Economics on governing emergencies, we have found out that some of the challenges that you cities find, that our membership, 250,000 members around the world in 140 countries are facing, is a lot of administrative hurdles to innovate, to access finance, and to deliver new type of service provision that will be necessary to face the recovery. So we are very much with you in this endeavor. I hope that we can connect the dots between the G7 deliberations and the G20 deliberations through the cities networks, actually. So we are very much ready and stand with you. I'm sure that all the cities networks gathered here and working under the global task force very much agree with that. Very much looking forward to explore that, and hoping to see a little bit more of that universal approach to development and growth also in our joint statement towards the G7. Maybe the Urban 20 communique, which has been ratified by many cities, including some of them here, will be an inspiration for that. Thank you very much, Nick.
Thank you very much, Amelia. And I know that the statement that we're all collectively signing up to today, hopefully, refers to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, because I think they're a very solid basis for demonstrating action at whatever stage of a country's development. And thank you also for reminding us of the importance of cultural life in our cities. I said in my opening remarks that cities represent some of the joys of society, and culture happens in cities. It's one of the things that makes cities great cities. And I know that certainly in the UK context, and I guess in many other cities around the world, the cultural sector has been hardest hit by the COVID pandemic and is in most danger of being affected long term. And losing our cultural life would be losing a significant part of our identity of who we are, as well as some of the amazing things that make it just great to be human and alive. And thank you also, by the way, Amelia, for sharing a vision of a solidarity with the global south, which I know we've focused on G7 issues here, but that is such an important point. We can't see the most developed countries continue to accelerate ahead and leave others behind if we are true to those words that we said at the beginning around tackling inequality, tackling poverty, and creating climate justice for everyone. So thank you for reminding us of the importance of that. I'd now like to hear from the Commonwealth Local Government Forum, and we have Lucy Slack, who's the Acting Secretary General. Lucy, great that you can join us.
Thanks very much, Councillor Forbes, and thank you to the mayors and colleagues from the networks who've spoken.
Sorry, Lucy, we're getting a feedback problem. I think, can we just solve that?
Yeah, I've got it down. The volume is right down.
Lucy, the way I solved it was by putting none on the Interprefy application in a state of source.
Just turning it off.
Yeah.
That's great. We can hear you clearly.
Is that
now.
better?
Yep. Yep.
Can you hear me now? Wonderful. Sorry about that, colleagues. And having spent all that time waiting to speak, and then I blow your eardrums with that, I apologise. Councillor Forbes, mayors, colleagues, it's a real pleasure to be here and to join this important gathering. And I think that I'd like to just pick up on the point that you've just made, Councillor Forbes, in terms of thinking globally in terms of our cities and the role that the G7 can play in terms of putting cities and place-based development significantly onto the wider global agenda. There's not a lot that I can add to the challenges which other colleagues and mayors from around the world have mentioned in terms of these huge challenges that cities and local governments are facing. Obviously, the current pandemic, but also rapid urbanization and the climate crisis and the impact that that's having in our cities and on the quality of life of the citizens who live within our cities. We've done quite a bit of work as an organization, and I should say that CLGF is a body that represents cities, local government associations and ministries of local governments from across the 54 Commonwealth member states. So 2 members from the G7 and 52 members from around the globe. And really, in terms of the feedback that we've seen come from our members, it would very much follow on from the points that Emilia's just raised. I think that the COVID crisis and the pandemic particularly, but also the climate change challenges that we're facing and the injustice around that we're seeing around the world has really put a focus, I think, on the importance of decentralization and on revisiting some of those core principles around devolution and putting power, responsibility, but also critically resources down at the local level to enable cities to be able to respond at the local level and really build the kind of resilience that we know that we need to see going forward. And an earlier colleague, I can't remember who it was, who mentioned multi-level governance. I think that we see the Agenda 2030 and the SDGs, 17 SDGs, but 65% of the targets within those SDGs have a strong urban and territorial focus. So this we see very much as our agenda as local government globally. And I think that we really do need to put some meat on the bone in terms of what we mean by multi-level governance and how we actually look at the different elements of government and governance working together. And I would say that one of the things that we have been able to achieve, I think, over the last 5 years at least, and I think colleagues from ICLEI and from UCLG would, I think, agree with me, is actually try to bring together a much more collective voice for local government. Because I think we are advocating for particular issues, but I think we're also advocating strongly as networks for a seat at the table to be able to be involved in some of the decision making that actually affects and impacts directly on local government and local government's ability to do its job. Many others before me have said that we are, of course, much more powerful together than we are alone. And I think that the growth of city networks is a testament to that. But I would urge our city network colleagues to continue to kind of come together under the Global Task Force to work collectively on some of these really big issues to make sure that we can make and continue to make significant impact and find a way to ensure that local government is not just receiving some of the outcomes from the major summits, but also actively engaged in shaping the dialogue at the summit and, more importantly, the outcomes from summits such as the G7. And I also think, just in closing, that we really mustn't overlook the value of international networks in terms of their learning opportunities, but also just in terms of peer-to-peer support and mentoring for mayors of cities of all sizes. And we've heard obviously today from many of the major cities, but I think, you know, we also need to think about how those cities relate to some of the secondary cities in their respective countries. And I think that these networks and using networks to learn and to share can play a really important role in building up the kind of voice that we need to be able to take a strong approach to making sure that we see cities reflected in international decision making in organizations and summits such as the G7. And I would totally, our organization would be very happy to come in behind the statement. And I think one of the things that we do as an organization is we also focus on how we influence within our own Commonwealth, and 54 member states actively focusing on many of the issues that we've talked about today. And we actually have a piece of advocacy which is ongoing with the Commonwealth to ensure that they will have this issue of sustainable urbanization on the main Commonwealth agenda. And so I think, you know, we need to think about how we link these events and these summits together. We've talked a little bit about the Urban 20, and we're talking today about the G7, and let's also put the Commonwealth and think about how we can bring Commonwealth heads together behind this push for a greater focus on cities and empowering and opening up opportunities for the leadership of cities in terms of the recovery process from here, and in terms of, you know, really, as others have said, making sure we leave no one and no place behind.
Lucy, thank you for bringing the Commonwealth perspective and also reiterating the points that Amelia and others have made about leaving no one behind. And very, very excited about the possibilities that this emerging network can promote in terms of ensuring that we take everybody with us to a better future. Our last speaker on the scheduled list is my good friend from the opposite side of the Pennines in the north of England, John Merry, who is Chair of Key Cities and also Deputy Mayor of Salford. John, great to have you.
Yeah, it's always good to talk to you, Nick. Can I just sort of reflect on some of the things I've heard already, which I'm sure you'll deal with in your conclusion, but it seemed to me just over 100 years ago, the world met at the Versailles Conference to talk about another devastating event and how they were going to rebuild the world afterwards. And I think it's the consensus that unfortunately, in their attempts to simply build back where they had been before, they missed an opportunity and missed a chance to transform the world. And I think that's where we are at the moment. And I'm very struck by listening to everybody around the world, the amount of consensus there is over what is actually required. And I think about what you've led the way with, Nick, in our country, and I've been involved in, is we have delivered for central government effectively the combat, the attack on the pandemic and the solutions that have been found. And I think we're entitled now to say that we believe that we can represent people as a far more effective way than just simply kowtowing to central government. And I think that's a common theme across what everybody has been saying, actually. It's not a question of, as has been put by our Prime Minister, simply building back better. It's a question of building back differently. And we know what the issues are in our areas. It's about green issues. It's about a desire for a more sustainable future. It's also about the recognition that many of us have city centres that need to be fundamentally transformed if they are to meet the needs of the 21st century. And the third crucial issue for many of us is the inequality that has been highlighted by the effects of the pandemic, where certain groups have suffered far more than others. So I think for all of those reasons, I think this is a really exciting initiative. I think this is an opportunity for the urban areas of the world to get together and to say, you know, we believe that we are of the future. We are the possibility of transformation in terms of this world. I believe we lead the way in entrepreneurship, in innovation and change. And I think this is a really exciting prospect that I would like to be involved in, actually.
Thank you very much, John. It's always really good to hear your perspective on things. And like you, I've been so struck by the commonality of themes throughout the discussion today. I was hoping we'd have a little time to have more of a free-flowing discussion, but I appreciate that everybody's in different time zones, and I will make sure we end on schedule. So let me just pull the discussion together so far with a few thoughts and reflections on where we go next. I was worried when I started out that it would be difficult to find common themes throughout the discussion, and everybody would have a different perspective. That has been completely dispelled by the strong focus that everybody has mentioned on tackling the climate emergency, tackling poverty and inequality, and re-establishing cities within our respective national networks as drivers of growth, opportunity, and greater equality for the future. And every speaker touched on those themes in one way or another. And for me, that was a hugely exciting revelation for us, because that gives us such a strong platform of international collaboration and such a strong common starting point that we should be able to do amazing things together. This isn't just about sharing what we're doing or identifying where we have common themes. There's also, I think, a real imperative for us to learn from each other. And we've had great examples today about how different cities and different city networks are approaching the same challenges that we face. And I think the more we can share ideas and new initiatives, the more we can respond more quickly to the needs and challenges that our citizens face in an ever-changing world. There was also a very strong theme in our discussion around how we're not just here as a delivery agent of our national or federal governments. We are able to do things that they can't. And in the climate change agenda, for example, we don't just have a list of big projects that we're delivering which are going to help reduce carbon output, whether that's in our transport systems or commercial properties or domestic properties, which are the major generators of carbon in our cities. But we can bring people together. We can convene partners. We use our leadership of place to bring agencies and organizations and universities and different business sectors together around a common goal. And we can lead our citizens on this agenda too. We can build consensus and coalition for change at a city level in a way that national governments just can't because of their different function. And anybody who doesn't understand that ahead of COP26 is really missing such an important part of the agenda that we can play in helping address the climate emergency. The other thing that struck me was how much our ambition to tackle inequalities and address the climate emergency transcend both political affiliations and geographical boundaries. And that, I think, gives us such a common cause. Our role as leaders of cities isn't just to lead our places respectively, or indeed our national networks. What's come out of this conversation for me is the importance of us demonstrating global leadership through interconnected networks of cities. And nobody else is going to do this. If not us, then who? And if not now, then when? Our time has come to lead. And I very much hope that what has been just an inaugural conversation, actually, it's been more than that. It's been an historic event that I hope we'll all look back on as the starting point a momentous and powerful partnership, global partnership, that can deliver for all of our citizens, our nations, and beyond. So I think we should have a note of this discussion and a draft high-level action plan to go alongside the statement that we are signing up to help us engage with the future G7 process. And again, I heard many people say, let's make sure that this is part of the G7 event, G7 events in future, rather than just a one-off. Colleagues, it's been a huge privilege for me to be able to chair this first summit and to meet you all, if not in person, at least virtually. I very much hope that we can meet again very soon in person and continue this rich and important conversation on behalf of our cities, our countries, and our global communities. Thank you for your time today. I look forward to seeing you all again in the future. Let's make sure we follow this up with concerted action and use this new emerging global network for positive change for everyone. Thank you so much, everybody. Great to see you all, and enjoy the rest of your day, however much of it you have left. Thank you.
Well done. That was terrific. Fantastic.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night from Australia.
Merci beaucoup. Bonne journée.
Good night. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night from